Good afternoon, and welcome to Thursdays with Friends, our online conversation on current issues. With Democrats holding their convention this week and the Republicans holding theirs next week, we are focusing our chat on the very pertinent topic of voting and elections. This program is brought to you by the Friends Committee on National Legislation, a national nonpartisan Quaker organization that lobbies Congress for peace, justice, and environmental stewardship. I'm the show's producer, Wesley Wolf-Bear-Pinkham. Our chat host is Diane Randall, FCNL General Secretary, who was recently recognized as one of the top faith leaders to watch in 2020. Congratulations, Diane. Her guest today is Jim Cason, FCNL's lead advocacy strategist. We're so excited to have everyone joining us from all over the world and all over the country, and I'm passing it to you, Diane.
Thanks, Wesley. It's great to be with all of you. This is one of my favorite times every twice a month that we get to do Thursdays with Friends and see so many friends who have been with us for a long time. So thank you for joining us again. So welcome, whether you're coming to us through Zoom or through Facebook or through YouTube, we really are happy you're here. And I'm thrilled that Jim Cason, who is our Associate General Secretary for Strategic Advocacy, will be our guest today. And Jim, many of you know, has a lot to share about this very vital topic. So before we turn to this topic, though, I wanted to just do an update about our lobbying on COVID relief legislation. Many of you have taken action over the last month or so, and we are really grateful for that. Right now, the House and the Senate are both in recess. As you know, they're going to be coming back in this Saturday to deal with the U.S. Postal Service issue. But they have not yet, the Senate and the House are in different places about COVID relief. And so we are continuing to advocate very assertively, particularly with Republican Senate offices. And we expect that they'll be taking this issue up when they come back in September. So if you're wondering what else you can do, keep talking to your senators and to your members of the House. I was chatting with Amelia earlier, and because we've been focused so much on the Senate, she said, well, some of the House members aren't sure what we're doing. So as you know, we believe it's always important to talk to your elected officials. So these visits make a difference, particularly when you can share stories about what's happening in your local community. I was on a visit with some folks from North Carolina who could talk about hunger they're seeing in their communities and the risk of eviction and the need for unemployment compensation. So we really urge you to keep up that advocacy. So right today, though, we're going to talk another critical need that is pressing on us, and that is the question about voting this year. And there has been so much in the news about vote by mail, about obviously how do you conduct an election during a pandemic when people need to keep socially distant. So we want to talk today about how to assure that every person votes, that your vote counts, and that you talk to other people about voting. There's some great social science that kind of gives us an idea of how to increase voter turnout. So I'm going to turn to Jim and ask him to share his wisdom with us, what's he learned, and what's FCNL focused on right now.
Thanks, Diane. And it's really a pleasure to be with all of you today. And I really want to begin by also saying thank you, because your advocacy, your engagement with congressional offices, and your financial support, that's really what makes our work so powerful here in Washington. And we are seeing movement on the COVID package, and particularly on the question of including SNAP. And we're told that that's in part because of the visits you're making to offices. So thank you for that. And as Diane said, I'm super excited today to talk about ways that we can advance our issues in the lead up to the November 2020 elections. And even in the middle of this pandemic, in the middle of an economic recession, at a time when the country is finally beginning to reckon with centuries of racism, there are opportunities to raise these issues, and there's actually an urgency to raise these issues right now. But as we start, we want to start with the question of voting. And as everyone on the call probably knows, as a nonpartisan organization, we don't advocate for particular candidates for public office. But I can tell you, as someone who has lived and worked in other countries where people are denied the right to vote, I think voting is one of the most fundamental bedrocks of our democratic system. And we believe that every voting age person in this country should have an easy, effective way to vote. And we also see that as something that all of us in the FCNL community can spread to other people in our communities. As Diane said, the social science on this is really obvious. If I get asked by a friend whether I'm going to vote and what my plan is, that's going to make a difference.
It is ironic that in this country, the US as a leading democracy, we trail other wealthy countries in terms of our voter turnout. So 56% of the US voting age population cast ballots in the 2016 presidential election, but only 49.3% in the 2018 midterms. And if you look at this data more closely, only 3 out of every 100 young people in the age group of 18 to 29 voted in the 2018 election. Now, we know that people typically do vote more often in presidential elections, and this election has people probably feeling an even greater sense. We're hearing, and I think some of us share a concern that really the questions, the very fundamental issues of our democracy are at stake right now. And so getting people out to vote is absolutely essential. And for many of us, it is almost sacred, a sacred opportunity. And so again, sharing that information with others is really important. Jim, we've taken some specific initiatives around young adults. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure, Diane. And I just want to reinforce a point that you made as we get started, and that is, people always ask me, get specific. So here's a little specifics. Are you making sure that everyone in your family, in your meeting, in your church, in your book club is registered to vote and has a plan to vote? That personal outreach now is really important, because in a time of COVID, we actually need to plan ahead. I would recommend go ahead and request an absentee ballot if you're going to, or figure out another way that you can vote by mail, or plan to participate in early voting. It's not that difficult in most states, and particularly because we don't know what the healthcare situation is going to be in November, getting that plan figured out right now is really, really important, and getting as many people as possible to vote even before the November 3rd elections is vital. As Diane said, we're particularly focused on ensuring that young people get to register and commit to vote, given the numbers that you talked about, Diane, which is why back in March, FCNL established a partnership with a group that actually spent most of its time in the last years registering young people at concerts and musical events. And they have set up a very easy way for young people to register to vote, to change their address, and then to commit to encouraging their friends to vote, to make a plan. It's easy. I think Stephen has put it in the chat, but it's fcnl.org/vote for those of you who are calling in and can't see the chat. Again, fcnl.org/vote. It's focused on young people, but that doesn't mean older people can't use it as well. So I'd encourage you, again, most of you are probably registered to vote, but do you have a plan to vote? And for the young people, we want to also make sure that their peers are coming to them. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But for young people in particular, we're trying to set up an easy system where you can reach out to your friends. And in an era when lots of young people aren't where they had planned to be. I thought I was going to college, but actually I'm staying home with my parents, or I'm in a slightly different district. Figuring all of that out. This website that we've set up has a really easy way, even in some of the complicated states like Texas, to help you register to vote. So send an email, talk over dinner, make an announcement at your meeting or church, figure out how you're going to get your ballot cast.
Right. And as Jim said, of course, people know that FCNL is a nonpartisan organization, but I can tell you that most people who work at FCNL, and I would venture to say most people like you who are fairly involved with FCNL, are probably following politics pretty closely. And my guess is that you may be watching the Democratic National Convention this week, and you may watch the Republican National Convention next week. And I know that some of you might have seen President Obama speak last night. And I have to say that it was a powerful message, and specifically the message about trying to allay cynicism. I mean, that's a real issue for many people, as they feel that their vote won't matter, that it doesn't make a difference. And so, and if they haven't been engaged, they may not see how it does. And so that's one of the reasons why I think particularly younger people who may feel that kind of disengagement, it's incredibly important that through their own peer networks, that there's a lot of engagement happening. That's something we've been working on. Many of the people on this call have also supported financially. In other ways, you've been very generous to help us build out FCNL's young adult program. And I'm thrilled that we've been able to sustain most of that through this pandemic, even though we are still working remotely. We had the Washington Summer Intensive just a couple of weeks ago, Jim, and you were instrumental in, with Larissa Gil Sanhueza putting that together for us. So share a little bit about these young adults and how they're participating in voting and what they're doing in addition to promoting voting.
Sure, Diane, and it was very exciting. I feel very privileged to be able to work with this community. And as Diane said, earlier this month, we had a 7-day virtual training with our fabulous new class of Advocacy Corps organizers. 20 young people who will spend the next 10 months asking questions of candidates running for office and lobbying Congress to protect young undocumented immigrants in this country and create a pathway to citizenship. It's really an amazing group of young people. It includes college students, Quakers, several people who have experienced time in this country without documents, some individuals who've already been pressing their local governments to action. But most of the people in this program have not been involved in the past in lobbying or advocating at the federal level. And, you know, as Diane knows, and some of you on the call know, this is really a training program. It's one of the ways in which we identify people all over the country this year in 18 different states and bring them in to learn our Quaker style of advocacy and then go out and bring their friends and community into lobbying. And one of the most exciting things in the last couple of weeks that Larissa shared with me is that one of the participants in this Advocacy Corps program last year, because of her experience with FCNL, just got named to the very prestigious Gabby Giffords Fellowship Program for this next year. And she credits entirely the fact that we brought her in. She didn't know anything about federal advocacy to doing this work. I always say, of course, she's a powerful young woman who is in her own right, someone who is going to make a difference in the world. But I think FCNL played a role. And for all of you who have contributed to this program in some way, I just also want to say thank you. You really do participate in making this possible for us. And so really, that's the kind of thing that we're doing. This as an example of what this group is doing, they're going to be going out in this next moment and asking candidates, do you support a pathway to legal status for undocumented youth in this country? In fact, just this week, so just a week and a half after the training program was over, our young Advocacy Corps organizer, Nedy Velasquez in Southern California, was able to attend a virtual candidate forum and specifically get space to ask the candidates running for her open house seat if they will support the Dream and Promised Act, which is the bill that the House passed that provides a pathway to legal status for undocumented youth and others. This comes on top of, I think it's almost 36 lobby visits in the last 10 days that these young people have already done. And remember, they were just trained in the first 7 days of August, and they're already going into congressional offices and having these conversations. I'm remembering a young woman who went into a congressional office with a very conservative member of the House, who I actually know quite well, and found out that he actually supports a pathway to legal status for undocumented youth in this country, but he didn't have it on his website. They said, no, it's on our website. She said, no, it isn't. They said, okay, well, we'll put that on our website. She said, okay, well, the next thing you have to do, and that's the kind of energy we're really getting from young people. And I have to give credit to Larissa for the training that she really provided for this young group of advocates. It's really, really exciting. And they're gonna have an impact during this election season, which I believe will have an impact on what Congress actually does in the first 100 days of the next Congress. Because we know, and I know we're gonna get into this now, Diane, that what candidates hear during the election season really does have a huge impact on what they actually do when they're in office or when they're reelected.
Thanks, Jim. You could tell that we get a lot of energy working with young adults, and it's been really inspirational for us. So I do want to invite comments and questions, and I love that Diane Butterfield has shared that she talked to her 93-year-old mother who pledged to assure that all 100 residents register, and that her mother, who happens to be an activist, surprise, surprise, said she would challenge their sister retirement community to get 100% voting. Deanne's getting the I voted stickers for peer pressure. David from Arlington has shared that there is a specific website called eldersaction.org. And so please keep sharing any kind of resources you have, but also please put your questions in the chat. Let's assume that right now we have 100% of you are already planning to vote. Some of you, I don't think anybody's been able to vote yet, but you may within the next 2 weeks. You've checked your voter registration, you know how you're going to vote, and you have decided here are the 5 people. You know, maybe you have a mother like Deanne's, or maybe you have a friend who's willing to go out and find other people to vote. But how else can we bring up these vital issues that FCNL works on? Jim mentioned immigration, but you know, many of you have worked on trying to repeal the authorization for the use of military force. We have worked on the Justice and Policing Act. I mean, one of the things we love about FCNL is we have a range of issues that touch peace and justice and climate change. And we have questions about every one of those for candidates. So Jim, you've really been instrumental in helping develop those questions and working with people to use those questions to engage candidates of both Republican, Democrat, or even independent who are running for the House of Representatives and for the US Senate. So tell us more about that.
Sure, Diane, and I'd say that that we've got a number of resources in this area, but the core thing is what I mentioned before, which is I know from talking to congressional staff that when you ask a question, particularly during this period leading up to the elections of a candidate, they're pretty quick at getting an answer, and they pay a lot of attention to what kind of questions get answered. And we're frankly bringing in questions that they don't always hear on the campaign trail. So particularly on things like the authorization for the use of military force, or the 1033 program that takes weapons of war and puts it back into our local policing. You can look at the FCNL newsletter that we sent out back in January of this year. You can also go on our website to fcnl.org/elections2020. And I'm sure Stephen will put that into the chat. But again, fcnl.org/elections2020. And we've selected, our lobbying teams have selected about 12 or 13 questions on everything but from Native American issues to gun violence, to climate change, to the war in Yemen. There are so many different questions that you could bring in. And the good news is, well, one other thing just to say is many of you will probably also be getting a letter from Diane in the mail sometime in the next couple of weeks. In fact, a couple of friends of mine have already gotten it. That look for the sticker. There's a voting sticker, but that talks about the importance of asking these questions. And the good news is already we're getting these questions asked in other parts of our networks too. As some of you know, we have about 125 advocacy teams around the country in 42 states. And I know of 2 of these teams that have already had meetings with candidates running for office to ask them about preventing war with Iran and repealing the war authorizations that have been used as blank checks for 3 presidents. I think the most recent of those meetings was in Austin, Texas. But whether it's an advocacy core organizer like Nettie Velasquez or the Austin advocacy team, or it's something else that you are doing yourself, that you do with your friends, I think those kinds of questions really make a huge difference. And we'll talk in a minute, I think, about specifically what are the ways that you can bring these questions to the candidates? Because I think in this era of COVID, you can't necessarily go to a campaign rally.
So yeah, I think that's a great segue, Jim. And just why don't you, give it? I mean, you've given us a couple of examples, but when we think about like how to pose these questions and how to then follow up, not just follow up immediately with what kind of responses we get, but how do you follow up after the election? And I think what we are always working on is to try to build relationships with Congress, with the members of Congress. So how does this lead us to that?
So, and that's a great question. Thank you, Diane, because I just really want to get specific. So I hope you'll consider signing up to get emails from the candidates in your area. Follow them on Facebook or Twitter or whatever else other social media you're on. Look for when they're doing virtual events. Most of the candidates are doing virtual events. And then register and join those events and ask your questions, always bearing in mind that our approach is to ask questions respectfully and leave space for answers. But that is a great way. We've had folks in Pennsylvania and all over the country that are already starting to engage with these candidates. And you can use the questions that we've shaped on our website on a range of issues. Pick the issue that you think really moves you at this moment, or the issue you think is most important. Another way is letters to the editor. This is particularly, again, when we don't go outside, sending a letter to the editor where you name the candidates by name and say, I'd really like to know where my candidates stand on supporting tribal sovereignty and the Violence Against Women's Act. I would like to know where my candidates stand, and then name the candidates that are running for office. And I can guarantee you that that will get their attention. And then I think another way that you alluded to, Diane, that I think is really important is we're a nonpartisan organization. And so we don't take a position on candidates, but we know there are individuals in your community who know the candidates and work for them. And as you ask friends who their favorite candidates are, find out what kinds of relationships they have with people running for Congress. I hear regularly from congressional staff that the relationships their candidates have, their members of Congress had with supporters before the election are really last. And we've worked with people who have worked with candidates before they got elected to develop relationships, long-term relationships with those candidates to help raise our issues after they're elected. Again, FCNL is not going to work with them to get elected, but you have individuals who build those relationships campaigning for people who can ask questions as well. And you then after the election, it's really important that we work with you to build those relationships as these people take office or return to office. And Diane knows, and I know of times when we've got several senior members in the House of Representatives who will give us face-to-face meetings with our lobbyists because we have constituents who worked for them or worked with them and helped them get elected. So that's really important. And if you have that, I would encourage you to get in touch with one of us and let us know about that now, or build those relationships so that after the elections, we can really work with you to continue to advance FCNL's issues.
So Jim, I'm going to ask you, we've got 3 questions. I want to try to get to all of them. And if anyone else has a question, please put it in the chat. The way we're structuring this is instead of opening up mics, we're just trying to get questions through the chat since we're only going for a half hour. But these are questions from people who are asking about, they live in districts where they have their senators and their rep may be supportive already of voting rights. They're very good on a lot of their issues, and they want to know about, one, should they reach out and try to talk to other people, other members of Congress about either voting rights, or the second question is a little bit different, which is that we know that there's some organizations that are like I have a friend who lives in Maryland who is writing postcards into another district that's a swing state. In this case, it was a question about registration in swing states. Can you talk a little bit about what FCNL is doing in that area, or our advice about how people who may want to be more active can do that from, even if they have pretty strong representation that agrees with them.
So if I understand the question is, if my representative already is with FCNL on these issues, then what do we do to keep advancing these issues beyond our particular representative? And I think I guess I would say a couple things. What we know from the congressional offices is they're pretty rigid about, if you're not in their district, they're not going to pay a lot of attention to you directly. That's just one of the things that happens. But there's still a lot that you can do. I think one thing that you can do is write your friends. We've had meetings that have actually written meetings in other states and said, we hope you'll raise this issue, because that's a way to reach other candidates. Write your relatives and urge them to raise these issues as well. And then I also would say, go back, even if Barbara Lee is your representative, what we hear from her staff as well as lots of other staff is they need to hear that you support them. Because I can guarantee you that they hear from the people who don't support them. And I don't know how many times I've had congressional staff say to me, Jim, we are with you, but I got to tell you, we get hammered. This is the staffer speaking, on gun violence or on several of these other issues. And so don't ignore our friends. Don't forget to thank them for when they're with us and encourage them in other ways.
Thanks, Jim. And I just want to also give a shout out to those of you who do this virtual lobbying. Just yesterday, we saw a message, Jim, I think it was somebody on your team shared the message that they'd been to a lobby visit in a Republican office, and the staffer said, we really like meeting with people from FCNL. You're all so nice. So, I mean, I don't think it takes us that much more effort to be nice, and it doesn't mean we can't press our issues in a strong way, but our sense of respect for the people doing this work, I think, is really, really important. There was a question about annual meeting and lobbying at annual meeting, and we're going to make that the last question. I just want to respond. I think Sarah was the person who asked a question about whether we're partnering as an organization to try to do voter registration in swing states. And at this time, we are not doing that as an organization, although, again, I think we know individuals who are trying to do that. But I concur with what Jim said. There are a lot of Quakers in Pennsylvania, and we want to get to all of those Quakers and encourage them to vote and get them to get other people to vote. So that's one thing. I know that not everybody here is Quaker, but I think that's one state where we know it's going to be really important. So here's the question. It's this. What are we doing? I mean, talk just for a minute about our lobbying at annual meeting. This is an extraordinary opportunity because our annual meeting in Quaker Public Policy Institute is going to be a virtual event, which means that people who typically wouldn't come or can't come because of the distance or the cost can participate. And so we are focused in the Justice and Policing Act, which we think is absolutely essential to pass as a way to address racial injustice. But talk a little bit, I mean, we've also, just to be honest, and this is a whole other conversation that we probably can't get into, we understand that our meeting is taking place shortly after the election, which could be a very chaotic time. So Jim, I'll toss that one to you and speak to what we're going to be doing at annual meeting.
So what we're going to be doing is hopefully we're going to have an even bigger group of people lobbying Congress right after the elections to urge Congress to pass the provisions of the Justice and Policing Act. And we don't expect, frankly, that all of that will get done in the last month of the year in December. But we do believe that unless we put a big push on at the end of the year, we won't get anything done in the first 100 days of the next year. And as we've seen, I made a reference to this earlier, the importance of addressing the police murder and the police misconduct in this country just can't be overstated. Mm-hmm. And yet Congress, when I asked congressional staff about this, was we were thinking about what we're going to lobby on, they said, Jim, the danger is this goes away. The danger is people forget about this. And you're going to help us make sure that this doesn't go away, that this racial justice issue is front and center on the agenda for the end of this calendar year, because there is more work they will do at the end of December, and is the #1 issue when Congress returns in January. And I just think that is so important right now. I think that I can't overstate it.
Thanks, Jim. So wrap it up for us. What's your closing two pieces of advice to people as we send them off with gratitude for their participation today?
Thanks, Diane. I think the two pieces of advice I would say is we really push back on the cynicism about voting. I think one of the dangers of all of the noise, frankly, about the post office is people who are not us just turn away and say, oh, this is too complicated, I'm not going to do it. It's not complicated, just do it. And then the second thing is raise our issues now, because the issues you raise now and then come back next year with are the issues Congress is going to act on. And I'll just end with my own thanks again, because our power comes from your advocacy and your financial support. So thank you.
Amen to that. So I want to thank you all for joining us today and let you know that 2 weeks from today, we're going to be talking about prevention of gun violence, the issue of ghost guns, and the issue of the rising incidence of gun violence that we've been seeing, and what we can do about it, and moreover, what Congress could do about it. So I hope you'll join us again in 2 weeks. In the meantime, we have other events that are taking place at FCNL. Please do go back to our website and check out what else is going on. You're always welcome to join us in these virtual events, as well as at our annual meeting. And Stephen's put the connection to that event up in the chat. So thank you, friends. Thank you for voting. Thank you for encouraging other people to vote. And please stay in touch with us. Take care.